So, some backstory on my place and myself. I had moved into my own apartment from my parents' house with my cat about 8 months prior, and I was happy as could be. I spent countless hours just lounging around my place, cleaning, decorating, and making it my home. This apartment was a basement apartment, which meant that my windows were ground level. I had pretty awesome neighbors actually. The older Asian lady upstairs became a fast friend and was the mother figure around the place. My other upstairs neighbor was a guy my age, and we quickly became friends as well. My neighbors across the hall were a little bit more off-putting, whereas I would frequently hear the couple arguing loudly and slamming doors, and the hallway between us was always filled with an acrid, earthy smoke. The man of the couple across the hallway always took an opportunity to make crude and inappropriate comments towards me, which I always just brushed off because, let's face it, when you're a woman you get used to it. Until one night when things got really creepy. Now, our apartments had two entrances, a front door and a back hallway door. The front door was connected to the front parking lot, whereas the back hallway door just led into a dark alleyway behind the building, an area nobody should frequent. So on this particular night when I got home, it was already close to midnight. I headed straight into my bedroom to get undressed. I should tell you now that my bedroom window faces the back alleyway, and I had my blinds shut almost all of the way. They were maybe open half a foot, and the window was cracked to let the breeze in. After I got undressed, I walked around a bit straightening up, then headed to the bathroom to wash up before bed. As I stood there brushing my teeth, my cat came tearing out of my room and spun in the hallway to look in my room with her back puffed and growling. Not knowing what could make her do this, I peeked around the corner into the bedroom and didn't see anything. I noticed I couldn't see out the window since the light was on and there was a glare, so I flicked it off. In that moment, I saw the outline of a man, crouched outside of my window, low and close enough so that he could see through the 6 inches of glass that were exposed along the ground. I panicked and dropped to the ground, unable to move and not knowing what to do. Here I am, a 21-year-old girl living alone with her cat, no protection, and there is a man crouched in a dark alleyway behind my house. I crawled across the floor to where my phone was. It was charging on the floor next to the window and repeatedly tried to call the guy I was seeing to come to my house. He didn't pick up, and finally I gave up calling. I heard leaves rustling outside, and all of a sudden, I heard my crude neighbor from across the hall outside with a flashlight yelling, "Who's there?" After a minute, he came back inside and started knocking on my door. I jumped up and threw some clothes on and went to open my door. I know this was stupid. I have no idea why I didn't call the police at this point. When I opened it, he looked at me and asked if I had been hearing someone outside. He had been hearing somebody previously the past couple of nights. I said I had, and that I caught him looking in the window. At this point, I didn't put two and two together. After he left grumbling about the lack of security, I ran upstairs to knock on my neighbor's doors upstairs. Anything so I didn't have to be alone. Neither of them answered. By this time, it was almost 1 a.m. and a weeknight. I went back downstairs, shut and locked all of my windows, and took a can of wasp spray I had and sat in bed all night listening and watching for any signs of a stalker. The next morning, I went up and talked to the older Asian woman and told her what happened. She was mad. She had taken the habit of calling me daughter and definitely felt protective of me. This lady had to be 4'9" and 100 pounds soaking wet. She then proceeded to accuse the man across the hall of doing it and told me she always knew he wasn't right. That's when I put it together. Why would he knock on my door at 12 a.m. knowing full well it was a work week if he'd have thought I was sleeping? All of the lights were off. At this time, it was still hot at night and I felt trapped in my house. I used to love sleeping with my windows open and a fan on, and now I have to suffer every night in a stuffy house because I'm afraid of leaving anything open and unlocked. I never did confront my neighbor, but I did tell my landlord what happened and he came and installed a motion light in the alley. But it wasn't enough. I felt violated. How many other times had this happened and I didn't notice? Why should I have to hold myself up every night at my own home out of fear? I ended up breaking my lease early and leaving, and to this day, I will not sleep in a bedroom on the first floor. Hey guys, after a day or two of reading these stories, it sparked something that happened to me quite a few years ago. I haven't told anybody the complete context of this story, only a summarized version to a few people, but it haunted me as a kid. If you are in for a good, wow, that's screwed up, read or listen, you're in for it. What you're about to read or hear is 100% true, so I will begin. It was back when I was about 10 years old. 17 now, and I was walking to my friend's house. It was on a Saturday around noon, and my friend lived about a 5-minute, if not less, walk from my house. About halfway through the walk, a rainstorm came out of nowhere. Being 10 years old and just wanting to get to my friend's house, I decided against running back for a jacket. When I reached the street off of my friend's street, an inconspicuous white van pulled up beside me. The sliding door swung open, and a lady in her early 30s asked me if I wanted a ride, as it was obviously raining out and I had no jacket. Being a very safe kid, I told her I was going to a friend's house just up the street and that I was fine, to which she insinuated that I had to get in with them and that they would drive me there. A little backstory on the van. In my southern Ontario city at the time, there were constant news reports of, and I kid you not, a white van abducting numerous children, and actually I believe one of the children believed to be abducted by this van was actually killed. The van was described as a white Dodge Caravan, and I always remembered this because it was the same type of van my mom drove, but she drove a blue one. Anyways, back to the story. So, as I told the van I was fine, the remembrance of the story of the white van sparked in my mind. The van was known by the locals as Old Grump, as an elderly man with a forwards ball cap was always seen driving it. And I was absolutely mortified when I looked toward the driver's seat to see an old man with a ball cap at the wheel. I'm even getting chills thinking about this right now, let alone being alone on a street with these creeps in front of me. When I noticed the old man, I remembered more details of the van, the obstructed or non-existent plates. Considering I was about 2 feet from the back of the van, I glanced to look at the license plates, which were obscured by a garage bag. The total time elapsed between the van pulling up, me saying no, the lady trying to get me inside, and the realization of the situation was probably around 45 seconds. When I realized what could possibly happen, I told her I really had to go. I darted out of there. I've never moved so fast in my entire life. As I began to run, I heard the lady curse. Shit. And the door came slamming shut. The van began to accelerate again, but luckily for me, after cutting across a few lawns, I was maybe 20 meters away from my friend's house. As I reached my friend's house, I recall jumping over the water runoff between his and his neighbor's house and coming to their porch staircase. Now, most houses in my area have maybe 2 to 4 steps and then their front door, but my friend, living in a condo, had about 15 steps, with the door being about 2 meters off of the ground. I sped up the steps as fast as I could, pounded on his door and looked through the glass and saw him slowly walking towards the door. At this point I was screaming, "Cody, open the door," and then turned around to see the van just arriving across the street, maybe 2 doors down, in a suburban neighborhood, so maybe 50 feet away. My friend perked up and bolted towards the door, quickly unlocked it, and I rushed inside. To save some time, I summarized the story to him. We were both 10 years old and just intended on an afternoon of playing some Tom and Jerry style Street Fighter on PS2 when this whole ordeal happened. We panicked and didn't know what to do. His parents weren't home, nor were mine, and we wouldn't dare go outside to fetch help from the neighbors. We were on the border of calling the police. This is where it gets real messed up. We picked up the phone, but the line was dead. No calling the police. I know it sounds BS, but the area was only a few months old, so the phone and internet was extremely unpredictable, and with the now harsh weather, it was no surprise that the line went dead. We lay down on his living room floor. It hid us from plain sight and allowed us to look out the front window, and began peering outside with a pair of mini binoculars he had in his room. We always used to play army outside and stuff, so even though the circumstances were life-threatening, we wanted an excuse to use the binoculars. My friend handed them to me, and I brought them to my eyes. I looked outside, and to my surprise, nobody was in the van anymore. Completely empty. I handed them to my friend, and he stopped his breathing. I remember whispering, "What is it, dude? What, man?" And then before he answered, banging began on the garage door. Dead serious. We almost pissed ourselves. I was also on the verge of crying. My buddy Cody was frozen solid, and we didn't know what to do. Considering it was a condo, the garage was in close proximity to where we were. The living room, 15 feet from the front door, so we could hear everything. We heard the handle on the garage being fumbled with, so we grabbed kitchen knives and proceeded down the stairs silently. When we got to the bottom of the first flight of stairs, Cody remembered in a moment of panic that his dad's, I believe, uncle lived in the bottom flat of the condo and was possibly home. We pushed open his door and began calling out his name, Brian, but he wasn't there. We were petrified but felt a sense of security because we had 2 kitchen knives and Cody was a black belt in karate and kicked the shit out of kids twice his size. With our knives, we proceeded into the garage. Scared my heart was racing so fast that these creeps might hear it. We silently listened to the noises outside from the garage, communicating in gestures. The attempts to gain access to the house were sporadic and occurred over a time frame of maybe 20 minutes. Eventually, everything ceased. I held my breath and my heart stopped beating so fast. After about 20 seconds of staring at the garage handle, we heard a single word. Dang. It was the voice of a man, and that single word rung through my ears like a bullet and caused me to not sleep for nights on end. After standing there in shock and fear, afraid to move, we gathered the courage to make our way back upstairs. A few minutes later, there was a ring at the door. My heart dropped, and I'm almost certain that my nuts did too. We proceeded cautiously with our knives in hand. When we peered through the peephole, we saw Rogers, telephone company here in Canada, worker at the door with a clipboard. We opened up the door and bombarded this guy with questions, eventually amounting to asking if he was the one trying to enter the house. He wasn't. The van started up and left. Okay, so this is a story that happened to me when I was somewhere around the age of 12 or 13. I believe it was my best friend Anna's 13th birthday, but I could be mistaken. Regardless, that puts the year this happened around 2003 or 2004. I had known Anna since kindergarten. We had gone to elementary school together for several years, but then she moved to the other side of town when her mom remarried. So we only saw each other on special occasions, when my mom would drive me across town to spend the night. Now, this house was a weird house. It was in a pretty upscale neighborhood, a gated community if I remember correctly, but the entire area outside of the immediate neighborhood was sort of crap. For reference, this was in the San Bernardino area of California. Beyond that, Anna's stepdad was a total creep. He used to make sexual references around all of us young girls, and I'm pretty sure he was physically abusive to my friend's mom. Not to mention, he was generally unpleasant to be around. He just seemed to get angry at the drop of a hat. While this isn't 100% relevant to what happened, it helps you get an idea of the overall atmosphere of the household. Anyway, so cue the night of the birthday party. I always felt like the odd one out. Anna had made a ton of new friends at her middle school, and they all knew each other pretty well. There were about 10 of us in total, I think. So I had to try pretty hard to be involved in these sleepovers, or I would end up in the corner alone. Early on in the night, while Anna's mom and stepdad were still awake, it was a typical birthday cake and balloons and singing sort of party. Meanwhile, however, Anna's new friends were cooking up what we should all do when the parents went to bed. In excited whispers, some of the girls started telling me about how they had invited 2 of the boys from their school to stop by around 1 a.m. They had promised to meet them at the side yard gate and let them in through the back door so as not to draw the attention of Anna's parents. Both of the guys were super cute, they promised me, and I wouldn't be disappointed. We played it cool until Anna's parents went to bed a little bit before midnight, and then it became a waiting game. As the hour drew closer, the girls started debating who would go outside to meet the guys. It quickly became evident that although it seemed like a good idea at the time, most of the girls were still a bit scared of going outside in the dark alone. Wanting to fit in and gain some respect from Anna's new friends, I volunteered to go. Anna agreed to join, as well as Brandy, who was the one who invited the boys to meet us in the first place. Quietly as we could, we opened the sliding glass door and crept into the backyard. I think it must have been a full moon because I remember it seemed super bright for 1 in the morning. Anna's yard was pretty small and empty. We crept, giggling to ourselves, over to the wooden side gate and peeked into the front yard. Somebody was sitting on the curb. I remember I could see them quite clearly, despite the nearest streetlight being a couple houses away. They were facing away from us, hunched over with their knees pulled close to their body. It looked like they were waiting for something. Their hair appeared sparse and wispy, and they wore what looked like a gray wool suit. To top off of this strange sight, a strange briefcase sat next to them on the curb. I was instantly overcome by a sinking feeling in my stomach. Something wasn't right. This wasn't who we were expecting that was described to me. That was for certain. For what felt like a long moment, nobody said anything. We just stood peering over the fence. Then I heard Brandy's voice behind me speaking in a loud whisper so as to not alert Anna's parents. "Josh, Eric, is that you?" For the briefest of moments, I thought the stranger had not heard her. They remained with their backs turned to us, facing the empty street. Then slowly but deliberately, they twisted at the waist to stare directly at us. It became clear that it was a man, but much older than anybody we were looking for. His eyes were incredibly wide, almost circular, but the rest of his face was expressionless. For a moment we all stared. Then the stranger rose to his feet and began walking towards us across the front lawn. But it was not a normal walk at all. Imagine somebody power walking as fast as they possibly could without running, so that it almost looks robotic. That was how he walked, beside me. Anna managed a few words. Run. The three of us bolted for the sliding glass door at the back of the house, not daring to turn back to see if he was hopping the gate. We whipped it open, much to the alarm of the other girls, and fumbled with the lock behind us. There were no curtains to shield us from the dark backyard, so we dragged everybody into the kitchen and sat on the floor. There we described to the others what we had seen. Are you sure it wasn't just Josh playing a trick on you? One of the girls asked skeptically. Positive, Brandy replied. She started to say something else, but her words were cut short. Boom, boom, boom. Several of the girls shrieked. Somebody was at the front of the house, pounding on the large living room window. Not knocking, mind you, but literally pounding. They were obviously hitting the window with full force. Then we heard it again. What do they want? One of the girls whispered. None of us knew. Once more we heard it. After the third set of knocks, there was a long and very tense silence. I think most of us were terrified that he would hop the gate and come around to the sliding door, which aside from being uncovered was also fairly easy to unlock. After a couple of minutes of silence, Anna leaped to her feet. I'm going to get my stepdad, she declared. Several of us worked up the courage to follow her to the foot of the stairs. Despite it being close to both the front door and the window, both of which thankfully have curtains, her stepdad was already standing at the top of the stairs, totally perplexed, with her mom lurking behind him. What the heck are you girls doing? He asked. All at once, we clamored to explain that there was a strange man outside, that he had been sitting on the curb but ran at us when he saw us, and that just now he had been pounding on the window. I'm getting my gun, the stepdad said, and he emerged a few minutes later with a shotgun. We all waited with bated breath as he unlocked the door and stepped out front. There were a few moments of silence as he looked around, and then he came back inside and locked the door behind him, clearly annoyed. There's no one out there. Now keep it down, I've got work in the morning, he said. There was no arguing with him, but needless to say, none of us slept much that night. By the following morning, some of the girls were trying to justify it, speculating that one of the boys they invited might have sent a family member as a prank, but that just never made any sense to me. No normal late middle-aged or elderly man would agree to terrorize a bunch of little girls unless he was already a twisted weirdo to begin with. Years later, I made the connection that we were incredibly close to Patton State Hospital, as in within reasonable walking distance, which is a pretty massive mental institution, but I don't know if there were any escapes that year. The most reasonable explanation is that it was somebody on drugs, I suppose, but it was terrifying no matter who they were, especially considering the suit and briefcase get-up. What was up with that? Following that night, I don't recall ever spending the night at Anna's again, but I think it was more because her stepfather was a jerk and my mom didn't want me around him anymore. Anna's mom and stepfather divorced a few years later, and Anna moved out of state. I never saw any of her friends again. And while we've kept in touch, we don't talk much about our childhood, and we never discuss what happened that night. I thought about bringing it up, but I also worry it might bring back other painful memories of everything going on with her stepfather at that time. So, I don't know if that would be appropriate. Anyways, thank you guys for taking the time to read this, or listen. It was an interesting experience typing it out, as I've only ever told it out loud before, and very rarely. Back when I was living with my mom, there was this clearly mentally handicapped 40-ish-year-old man living upstairs from us. During the time I'll tell you about, it was 17-year-old me, my mom, and my 7-year-old little sister. Now, my mom was always super creeped out by this man. He had a creepy vibe right off the bat. He looked too long and too hard, smiled too readily, and got too close and too personal. But I always took him as harmless. Almost always. I'd go to the pool with friends, and he'd be there and follow us around. He would ask questions about school and my family, give me compliments, all the regular creepy stuff. And when I left, he would leave too. My mom stopped going to the pool. She had a similar experience apparently. I told her, this man is just a little off. He's like a child, that's all. No threat. I stayed out a little late once and was walking home, perhaps around 2 or 3 a.m. As I crossed through the basketball courts, he greeted me by name and invited me to play with him. I said no. He begged and I said no again. He followed me a bit and begged some more and I kept saying no. It's late. He went home. So yes, he was a creep, but not a threat. He seemed fine until the day he tried to break into my house. I was babysitting my then asleep sister, and it was perhaps 11 p.m. Much to my surprise, I hear a knock at the door. It was him, and he was trying to come in. I blocked the entrance and politely but firmly said no. He told me he was locked out and he really needed to come in. Again, I said no. I explained that we were just kids and we couldn't have any strangers, but offered to call a locksmith. He got a little frantic, said he was a doctor so I could trust him. What? I'm 100% sure he's not a doctor, but how strange of a thing to say. Once again, I said, sorry, but no. He said he and my mom were very close, and to at least call and ask her. This wasn't true, but I wanted to be nice. I called my mom knowing she would say no. I told him to wait at the door and I'd go grab my phone and call. I went to close the door, but he quickly stuck his foot in it. I told him to move his foot and he just went to the, please let me in, I'm a doctor thing again. I tried to kick his foot away, but he stayed firm. Now, this is when I look at him as a threat. I was worried for me and my sister. I told him to move and he ignored it and begged. Me and your mom are best friends, he said. Please, I'm a doctor. I grabbed the door and slammed his foot. He pulled back out of pain. He was pounding on the other side, begging to come in. I called my mom, more out of fear now. She's freaking out and told me to, no matter what, not open the door. I did it. I told him through the door, I'm sorry, but we are kids and we can't have anyone over. He just kept saying the same things over and over again. I'm a doctor, I promise. You can trust me. I'm good friends with your mom. And banged on the door a solid minute or so before eventually leaving. What a creep. The scariest moment of my life occurred when I was age 10. Male, by the way, and in 4th grade. The reason I remember that so distinctly was because the incident happened a week before my birthday in March of the year 2003. The clarity of the 15-minute or so ordeal has stuck with me to this day, and at the time it really messed me up for about 5 years. After this event, I told my friend, who was immediately intrigued, and he was the one who suggested posting it in this subreddit. The day that turned into a horror story for me started off on a rather exciting note. My parents informed me that for the first time ever, I would be staying home for a little while since they were going to a party until midnight and my younger brother, who was about 9, was going to sleep over at his friend's house a few blocks away. Now, this probably doesn't sound like much, let me tell you. To a 4th grader, that kind of independence seems incredible. Evening comes and I remember spending most of the night from 6 to 10 p.m. playing GameCube without my parents enforcing their usual limits. Now, before I get into the part where my night went downhill, allow me to give some background information on where I lived. My neighborhood in southeast Michigan was filled with mostly middle or upper class homes and was spread out fairly spaciously. It isn't like giant 4-acre country plots, but there is a good 100 yards in between houses. Enough room for privacy, but close enough to feel like a community. I lived in a 3-level home about 4 minutes into the subdivision from a main road. So at 10 p.m., my developing self-control told me that I should probably stop playing video games and head upstairs for some rest. I brushed my teeth and decided to read in bed until I got tired. After 10 minutes or so of reading, the chime of the doorbell suddenly snapped me out of my peaceful state. I lay in bed for a second and then cautiously walked out of my room. I stood on the landing on the top floor, peering down into the darkness of the main floor, and I jumped as the doorbell rang 2 more times. My young mind was racing and I was thinking of all the possibilities of who it could be. Was it my parents coming home early? They would have used the garage, right? Was it the brother's friends who lived next door? Well, it seemed kind of late for that. I didn't turn on the light to the stairway, but instead slowly started to descend the stairs to go to the door. My stairs are 5 feet to the left of the front door, and when I was halfway down them, I could clearly look out the decorative half circle of glass that is on top of the door. What I saw gave me one of those moments where you can feel your whole body flush with hot blood as the adrenaline kicks in and your heart rate rapidly accelerates. Facing the front door were 3 men in masks. I only glanced for a second, but they are ingrained in my memory forever. All 3 masks were grotesque Halloween masks, with wiry hair sticking out in all directions on the back. In a split second, I ran back up the stairs debating what to do. This was pre-cell phone, so I couldn't call my parents, and I foolishly thought at the time the police would be mad or wouldn't believe such a young kid dialing 911. I crept into my upstairs bathroom that was directly over the front door to get another look at the men in the masks, and I remember shaking from fear. Sense was quickly leaving me, and I mistakenly turned the light on in the bathroom. I crawled to the blinds and pushed one up to get a view. The three men were still standing there, but I also saw a fourth masked person crouched underneath a large pine tree in my front yard, holding an object I didn't immediately recognize. Over the years, I have speculated either a camera or a firearm, but never knew for sure. However, in my haste, the tiny amount of light streaming out the window quickly caught their attention and they gazed up at me. I'm sure my small figure was outlined by the light, and this led to them to start banging on the door and beckoning me to calm down. I stood there with tears streaming down my face, looking down at the four figures in masks, through a gap in the blinds, them staring right back at me. Suddenly, they left the front door and went to the side of the house. I ran to my room, turning off all the lights and huddling under my desk and hiding. I could hear the motion light by the sliding glass door facing my backyard, clicking on and off. Over the next 15 minutes, I didn't dare look outside. I braced myself to hear pounding on the downstairs back windows, and at any moment it felt like I would hear glass shattering and then barging inside. Crying, shivering, and not feeling safe inside my own house had to be some of the worst 15 minutes of my life, especially at such a young age. Thankfully, after a while, the motion light shut off for good. There was no trace of them. My parents came home to me wedged in between the wall and the bed in the guest room, eyes wide with fear. I told them what happened, and my dad explained to me that there wasn't really any evidence or anything for the police to track. For a few years, I became super protective of my brother and wouldn't let him go outside alone for fear of the masked men. I thankfully never had any other encounters with them, but it still screwed me up pretty bad for quite a while.